Okay, so hopefully you have a clearer idea, as much as the neurophysiology of the spinal cord can be, of how the pain signal, the nociception, is actually transmitted up to the brain for processing. This is the physiological part, right? That is the nuts and bolts. This is what's happening in the body. We started this conversation about pain saying how complex it was, and that emotions and memories and experiences all play a role in how we process and feel and deal with pain. So while the physiology is really good to know, we also need to know that there's this other aspect, and that's why this chapter was called The Physiological and Psychological Aspects of Pain. So now that we know how pain is transmitted, we also can then now talk about, okay, how can we control pain? And these are the pain control theories that are out there. So first thing to know when we start talking about pain control theories is, what type of pain control are you talking about? So we have primary pain control. This is resolving the physiological pain triggers. Okay, so primary pain control means actually removing the injury, or removing whatever is causing the nociceptors to stimulate the afferent nerves that is sending the signal up to the spinal cord and eventually to the brain. That's primary control, okay, by decreasing mechanical or chemical irritation. Secondary pain control is actually targeting the pain signal itself. So we're not trying to actually remove the source of the pain, we're trying to block or affect the pain signal itself. So we target the transmission and the perception of pain, not the actual tissue destruction or stimulation of the pain. We'll keep coming back to this as we start talking about pain theories, but I want you to be thinking as we go through talking about modalities, is this a primary pain control or is this a secondary? Am I just blocking the pain but not answering the larger question of the injury? Or am I dealing with the injury but the person's still experiencing pain because this is a longer process, and so should I really be also focused on the person's pain and being able to give some relief to that? Okay, so primary and secondary pain control. Evolution is on this screen, and that is because pain, like any system in the body, our knowledge is constantly growing and changing. Okay, we tend to think of anatomy as static, right? The human body has not changed much in the 200, 300 plus years that people have been studying the human body. However, understanding the brain changes all the time. And pain is definitely part of a brain mechanism. And so theories have come and gone or have been adapted based as we start to learn more and more. So just briefly going to kind of talk about some of the historic theories, and then going to talk about the ones that we most commonly use now, specifically thinking about modalities. So pain theories, again, starting from the beginning, have, like I said, evolved significantly. One of the first things that came out was this idea of specificity of pain. So specific nociceptors were directly linked to the brain. If they were stimulated, you felt this type of pain, and it lasted this long, and it had to do with that. We now know that's not really the case, okay? And again, didn't answer all the questions, right? Like one person can stimulate a nociceptor with the same type of pain and feel something completely different. And we know now that nociceptors can experience a wide variety of pain, and they don't have to be specific to just one type, and that they don't have that direct connection to the brain. We know the inner neurons play a role. Pattern was that the rate or pattern of the input, so how the signal was being sent on the afferent nerve, determined what type of pain it was. Once it reached the threshold and exceeded the threshold. But there was no real like specialization. It was just all about how the receptor was stimulated. And we also know that that doesn't really fit everything. Then came gait, or Melzak and Wall created the gait theory. And while it is dated and doesn't answer everything, it has now become the basis for really all the other pain theories. All the other pain theories still have a portion of gait in them. So that's why we're going to talk about gait. Also, gait theory sets us up for one of the main uses for electrical stimulation that we will use when we start talking about modality usage. So the idea here being that there's some sort of gating mechanism. So inside the dorsal horn of the spinal cord, so where that synapsis between the first order neuron and the second order neuron is going to happen, there is some mechanism in place that allows that signal to go up or doesn't allow that signal to go up. Okay, and it really only allows one sensation at a time to pass. This part we know has been adapted and kind of proven wrong, but for our sake it's really nice and easy to say that only one signal gets through. Okay, so we have multiple afferents. We have the A betas, the A alphas, the Bs, the Cs, A deltas, all those coming in, and depending on how they reach what we call the T cell or this gate, okay, determines which signal gets to go up to the brain. Now we know all those signals tend to, at least at some point, get some signal up to the brain, but again, for our knowledge and for our understanding, it's just easier to think that one signal is going to get up. And the T side is what decides which impulse is going to go up or down the spinal cord. So this is the one that is going to build up all of our other theories, and this is the one that's going to really set us up for understanding how we can control pain with various modalities. So within gait theory, thinking to what we've now talked about with these primary afferents, our first order neurons, now large is a relative term here, right? So they're larger than the C fibers, but they're still small. So really this should probably say small and smallest, right? But these small or slightly larger than the C fibers carry more of that sharp stinging pain, right? That specific localized pain. And then the small fibers, the smallest fibers, the Cs, carry more of the dull aching pain, especially a lot of the inflammatory pain. They're polymodal, things like that. So the gait control theory itself can be kind of described in two parts. You have the ascending, which is what we're going to most often call gait, the ascending mechanism, and then you have the descending mechanism, which is going to explain a little bit more of some of the evolutions of gait that happen later. So what we have is we have an increase in the non-nociceptive stimulation. Okay, so sensory stimulation in the very large fibers, the A beta fibers, they are going to be stimulated and come into that T cell in the same mechanism that these A deltas and Cs. What gait theory says is that if we stimulate those A beta fibers more frequently and in conjunction, they will be able, the signal will be able to kind of beat the A deltas and Cs because it's a larger, faster nerve and it can send the signal quicker, and also can just be more powerful. So it's going to send the A beta signal to the gate, and actually then that will close the gate on the pain and only let the A beta fiber sensation go up, which is strong sensory. If you go back to our chart, A betas were really our touch or our movement. And things like that. And so that signal gets sent up, and so we feel that more so than the pain itself. Okay? So again, the A beta fibers are going to come in along with the nocioreceptors input, and they're going to transmit into the spinal cord. And the mechanism really occurs kind of around that lamina 2. So back into that diagram of the spinal cord, the lamina 2, which is the subsynaptium gelatinosa. The stimuli from the larger myelinated A beta fibers enters the dorsal horn and synapses with the second order neuron and the other spinal interneurons in that area. So there's other interneurons that are going to have connection there that are going to act as kind of regulators and be able to kind of report on the type of sensation that's coming through on this nerve and the type of sensation that's being allowed up the gate. And so they kind of record things. So when we talked about that positive feedback, right, the more you drove on that unplowed, snowy road, the easier it was getting. These other interneurons measure that and then make it easier for certain signals to pass through. So they're going to then close the gate, causing an inhibitory effect on the smaller diameter afferents, so the C and A delta fibers. So those interneurons' role is really to open or close the gate depending on the type of input that they receive from the periphery. Okay. So that is kind of the ascending track specifically. So that ascending mechanism, if we increase non-nociceptive stimulation, so touch, movement, even cold and heat will be on these type of A betas, from the periphery to the spinal cord will elicit pain relief. So again, it's something coming from the periphery up into the spinal cord, so it's ascending. So big example of this, and you all do this all the time and don't even know that you're doing it. You're doing the gate control theory of pain control. Melzak and Wall's theory. When you nail your elbow, okay, so in this case you've been hit by a pitch, right? Or you hit your funny bone. Your immediate instinct is to go put your hand on it and rub. You are stimulating A beta fibers and sending that signal up to the gate, and that is what you process up in your brain over the pain. So it seems like a silly thing, but it can actually make us feel better. Okay? And the same thing happens when we use ice or we use heat. We feel the temperature less than the pain. Or I should say we feel the temperature more than the pain, and that lessens the pain. So the A beta fibers can decrease the input from the nociceptors and thus essentially change how we perceive the pain. The pain's still there. The nerves are still being stimulated. Our brain just only gets more of the A beta stimulation. Now, that only explained so much, okay? It didn't explain kind of, again, how the brain gets involved. So we know that there's other ways that we feel better on pain, okay? And so that led to another kind of evolution, which is the descending pain modulation, or the descending pain kind of mechanism. And this is that those small diameter nociceptors, okay, so the A deltas and the C's, specifically in this case A deltas, they can go on the pathway and their stimuli are transmitted to the higher centers, and so we sense pain, right? The influence of those stimulating non-nociceptor large diameter A betas doesn't come into this mechanism, okay? This is all about how we take the information from the A deltas and what happens in our brain to respond. And in this case, what happens is something that comes from the brain and goes out into the body, and that's endogenous opiates. So you've heard of, endorphin rush, right? So you break your arm, but your child is in danger, so you still pick up the car and you don't notice the pain and you don't feel the pain. That's because of endogenous opiates being released in your body, specifically in that case, endorphins, epinephrine, things like that. But that comes from the brain and then goes into the spinal cord, goes into the bloodstream and then eventually affects the gating mechanism at the spinal cord. It has nothing to do with touch. It has everything to do with the brain sensing all that overstimulation on those small diameter fibers. And so this is going to be another way that we can reduce pain. So again, those answered so many questions. But we still have these ideas and the ways that we felt pain and experienced pain that weren't really answered. That still did not really explain how your previous experience with pain would affect. And so gate theory has now been modified, again, to look at what's called the central control theory of pain. And this is the fact that in your brain, in the somatosensory and the sensory cortex, the pain center in your brain collects information from sources, from your memory, from vision, from smell, from your hearing, from your sight, from that nociceptive feedback. So the stimulation, and is it A delta, is it C fibers, how often does it happen? All of that gets put into your pain center and it integrates all that information and then uses that, sends those signals via interneurons back down towards the gate, and will tell you to either open the gate wider and easier, or to be a really squeaky, old, rusty, yard gate that's not going to open very well. So it intensifies or lessens the response to pain based on all of this extra information and our life experiences with pain, and what that pain could mean to things. So all that happens in the substantia gelatinosa. So again, in the dorsal horn of the spinal cord, right there by lamina 2. And the SG is always active, so it's always taking feedback. The large fibers, the A betas, are going to facilitate the SG and increase the inhibition of the T cell. Okay, the smaller fibers are going to inhibit the SG, which is going to decrease some of the inhibition of the T cell. Okay, so the T cell is going to let more pain signals go through if we're constantly bombarding it with pain signal. This is some of that sensitization idea. But then also if the central control says, yeah, all of our memories or all of our experiences with this type of pain or this experience makes us really concerned, it's going to let that pain probably get through more quickly, because again, pain's supposed to be a warning cycle. Or if we can really say, well, maybe this is a relief. We get that in our athletes all the time, don't we? Like, oh man, I'm so stressed out, I'm not playing really well, this is a great excuse. I would love, not that they love being in pain, but hey, this is almost a relief. And so then they actually may block some of that pain. Or again, so all that plays a role in the central control. Okay. But that still left some unanswered questions. Okay. The descending androgynous opiate theory wasn't exactly explained by central control, but it did get explained by the descending mechanism of gait. Okay, so again, this evolution came, and that's specifically a type of R10s. So we'll have different levels of E-stim that we can target. One of those levels is going to initiate some androgynous opiate release. And those opiates are what's going to potentially affect the gate closing, specifically in the cortical and subcortical areas of the brain. And I'll have a kind of diagram that shows that and how they regulate the release of enkephalins to inhibit the pain sensation. Then there was also the central control trigger theory, which took the androgynous opiate, took the central control, took gait, and kind of combined them all together. And also looked at this chemical mediator, like a neurotransmitter that is active inside the spinal cord, specifically in that dorsal horn, and the use of either endorphins or that enkephalin, usually the endorphin affects the enkephalin, to then inhibit the gait. So enkephalin interferes with the A delta and C fibers' ability to transmit through the T cell. The endorphins inhibit pain signal transmission, decreases the amount of chemical irritants in the bloodstream, because remember, the endorphin is actually going to come from our hypothalamus and our pituitary gland, and so that's going to go through the blood system, different than the enkephalin, which is only going to be inside the central nervous system. And both of those can be released by kind of low rate, what we call painful TENS, so a whole different level of TENS that we're going to talk about, level of pain control. And then the final one is the neuromatrix theory of pain. And so this is really kind of the most elaborate, it's kind of the most current. It goes way deeper into things that we don't need to. You can go into brain and behavior and neuropsych and things like that to get a better understanding of the neuromatrix theory of pain. But this takes into account a lot more of those psychosocial factors. So the central control theory and the central control trigger theory took into those ideas that the brain could store how we have responded to pain in the past. The neuromatrix comes into account and starts thinking more about the social cultural stuff. Again, how we've seen pain be expressed by others, what pain has meant to others. So not just our own experience with pain, but this whole wide variety. And again, that gets stored and can then influence our nerve impulses from there. So next up, we are going to be specifically now talking of how do we then control pain using these different theories that we know.